Good evening, everyone. This is Lloyd, and I've got a very special guest, Thaddeus, with me today, and we'll be discussing atheism. I watched Thaddeus do a talk recently on atheism. It was really good, and I thought he should really share it with everyone. I think it's relevant to all of us who have to deal with atheism and confront it, or especially when it confronts us. So, Thaddeus, welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for having me on. I'm very excited today to talk about one of the most violent, evil religions ever invented by mankind, and not talking about Islam for a change.
Yeah. So why do you make that very bold statement, Thaddeus? What makes you say that?
Yeah, well, atheism doesn't have a very long history, at least as far as being a major movement. Of course, there was isolated atheists here and there throughout human history, but as far as being a major movement, only between 100 and 200 years old, and already in that short period of time, atheism has led to the death of more people than the rest of human history from all other causes combined.
Very true, and we've discussed this at length. Before I go any further, let me just say hello to I've got Dennis Villainous, who's had to leave, but thanks for stopping by. Just Janice, Stephen Young, welcome everyone. Ransford, PK, Yaya, Dragon, of course, always supporting us. Thank you very much for that. Sister in Christ, Rick Bass, welcome from Cape Town. Great to see you here. Dan Simpson, Noah Act. We've got Reason Dancers in the chat too. And we've got, let's see, Chomlin Satan, welcome. New name, Anakatana. Stewards Impact Church, welcome. Tom, Gyokai. And Vegetal, of course. And PJ, welcome. Historical Christianity, most welcome. Vlad the Impaler. Pro-Life, Chloe, Dimitri, Gladiator. So welcome all. Thank you all for being here. Time Phaser and Martin Ackerman. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for taking this time on a Sunday to be here with us. And Thaddeus for joining me on a Sunday as well. So yeah, modern atheism started, from my calculations, from the history that I've done on atheism, roughly prior, but 270 years ago, roughly prior to the French Revolution, where it became an organized modern ideology, and it is the central, integral part of socialism. It is requirement for socialists to be atheists, and of course, it is also was then bolstered by Darwin. Darwin was a devout atheist, and he promoted atheism. And in fact, Darwinism as an evolutionary ideology was specifically anti-Christian. So your thoughts on that, or your further thoughts? And
Yeah, so we did several shows on atheism where you presented a lot of history that I had never heard before. It was very fascinating seeing the roots of atheism, seeing how they fought for a long time to have it recognized as a religion. And then, of course, today, any atheist that you talk to will probably be like, oh, atheism's not a religion. It's just a lack of religion or lack of belief. But they fought in the courts of the United States for a long period of time to have it recognized as a religion. The communist movement, of course, is well known and associated with atheism. But it was surprising to find that even before communism, even before Marx, that atheism was founded on violence. In the French Revolution, lining up priests to be killed, specifically because they were religious. It had nothing to do with politics or being opposed to the revolution or anything. It was just that the atheists who found a little bit of power were like, let's get rid of religion. How do we do that? We kill all the priests.
yeah, it was atheism or death, a little bit like Islam or death. Atheism at the point of a sword, bayonet, or gun. Yeah, and that's exactly how that went down. And also led to the first, I mean, the first, technically, scholars say the first 20th century, well, the first modern genocide was in the 1880s. But really, the French Revolution was genocidal. I mean, they murdered, what, like 500,000 people? And they intended to wipe out all of Western France. So yes, it was genocidal. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people were murdered, dispossessed, and I mean tortured and killed in the most heinous fashion. So atheism did not lead to reason, and also atheists say we love science. Well, science led to eugenics. Science led to nuclear bombs. Science led to pollution in rivers, pollution in oceans, and egregious medical experiments. So science without morality, and atheism has no claim on morality. So yeah, your thoughts, that is.
Yeah, it's very interesting that somehow, maybe 50 years ago or something, the atheist movement was centered primarily on claiming that there was no good evidence for God, that there was good evidence for atheism. But in the last 20 years, it's been almost entirely based on this idea that religion is evil. And specifically Christianity, because whenever they say religion, they really mean Christianity. They don't have a lot of typically, right? Because atheists come from the West, they don't have a lot of experience with any other religion. So what they really mean is that Christianity is evil, and that if we just got rid of religion, then we could all get along. That all war is caused by religion, essentially. Blah blah blah. And then you look at the actual history, and you see that, not surprisingly, given that there is no
Mm.
intellectual basis for any kind of morality in uh, atheism. Not to say that atheists aren't moral. I mean, there are plenty of atheists who follow Christian moral values despite being atheist, but there is no intellectual basis for that. Supposedly, we're just, a collection of chemicals that came together by random chance, and we have no particular value in this world. Thus, there's no reason why you would say that it's wrong to harm another human being. So they've come to this argument that uh, Christianity is immoral, that it causes human death and suffering, while in fact having no reason to tell us that that's wrong. And of course, their own history shows what happens when you get rid of religion. It's not that you suddenly are all peace and loving with one another, it's that you get rid of your inhibitions and you more freely and openly kill those who are opposed to you.
This was proven. I mean, it's interesting that they make the claim that religion causes war. Now, I'm going to exclude Islam because Islam is actually first and foremost explicitly a political system. Like Nazism or communism, it is a totalitarian political system as defined within its own dictionaries. However, when you look at manuals on warfare, if you look at von Clausewitz on war, or you look at Sun Tzu's book on war, or any of these, you don't find mention of religion in these major manuals on war. So if religion is a major cause of war, why aren't major theorists of warfare including it as an integral part of warfare? Because it's conspicuously missing.
Yeah, good question. If religion is the cause of war, how come none of the classic manuals on how to wage war say anything about come up with a great religious cause for your war, and that'll really motivate people, or anything
Except in
along those
Islam.
lines? Yeah, except in Islam. Except in Islam.
Except in Islam. So yeah. So Thaddeus, do you want to get started? And I can bring up some odd references as we go through as well. So do you want to get started on your slides? I'm going to jump
Yeah, yep.
over.
Go ahead and bring up the
It's up.
slides. So we're going to be talking about confronting atheism. So we've talked with some about the history in the past, and my presentation, while it may occasionally touch on that kind of material, is primarily focused on how a Christian should respond to atheism, how to talk to atheists, in other words. So I think the first crucial thing to realize is that there are basically two different types of atheists. There's the kind that we encounter on YouTube and elsewhere on the internet, who are very vocal. They are very confrontational. They think that they are the greatest thing in the history of humanity, that they are super smart and everyone else is incredibly stupid. Unfortunately, this type of atheist mostly just wants to play games. And we'll get to how to respond to them and talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I also want to point out that these types of atheists are very rare in the regular world, right? Not on the internet,
Mhm.
but in your day-to-day conversations. You'll encounter lots of people who, what I team as normal atheists, this individual here who just kind of looks kind of bored and disinterested, who are not going around saying how evil religion is, are not spending all their time arguing against theism or Christianity, but just kind of don't have a lot of opinion and have defaulted into an atheist perspective, and how you talk to these two individuals is completely different. So we'll start with the internet atheist, or as I call it, the most boring conversation in the history of the world.
Most predictable too.
Yes, exactly. Because they always say the exact same thing. And they come into the chat, I bet you we'll get at least one today at some point, and say, "You have no evidence whatsoever." Then you fall for the game, and you start giving evidence, and they say, "That doesn't count as evidence. You have no evidence. You are pathetic." And then you give some other evidence, and they say the same thing, because they define what counts as evidence or not. And guess what? It doesn't matter what you say. Whatever you say, they're going to say it doesn't count as evidence. That there is no evidence for Christianity or religion or a deity or anything like that. Then the other half of the equation is they'll redefine atheism. Classically, atheism is defined as a positive position that there is no God. Like, i.e., you're making a truth statement. You're making a statement that there is not a God. However, atheists today, and my cat is messing around and changed the slide on me. Atheism today, on the internet at least, is always redefining. "Oh, I don't have any beliefs. I just have a lack of belief. Therefore, I don't have to answer for anything. You have to give all the evidence. I don't have to do anything." Or as when Lloyd came up with, I don't know, it was around 50 different dictionaries
80.
and
80.
philosophical papers, academic works that
80.
define atheism. 80, all in the same way, right? They all define it in the way I just defined it, as a position where you take a stance that there is no God. And they'll say, "Oh, that's not my dictionary." And an individual actually did that, right? During one of our
Well, you
streams,
know
he
what's
came on and
crazy
he's
is
like,
I went to all of the
"You
major
cherry-pick
dictionaries.
dictionaries."
Yeah, but I went to all of the major dictionaries. I went to all of the major encyclopedias. I went to all of the major academic encyclopedias used in philosophy departments. I went to all the major textbooks from Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, and I went to the major PhD atheist academics in the world, right? And I had about 80, 85 different definitions from atheists, and then atheists rejecting these definitions, but yet they tell us, and most of these books are written by atheists, and then they tell us, well, you need to ask an atheist, and an atheist is allowed to define what an atheist is. Okay, so these PhD atheists are all wrong except you, who are some anonymous atheist on the internet. It's incoherent. I mean, it's completely incoherent. Those aren't real atheists, but this guy is, who's now embarrassed, and he's changing his mind and, changing the goalposts.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a game because they don't want to have anything to defend. They want to sit up there and reject anything you bring. As Stephen Young said in the chat, saying atheism is a lack of belief makes the term agnostic redundant. Yeah, we have a perfectly good term for someone who doesn't have a position, or even goes so far as to say it's impossible to know the truth. That person is an agnostic. However, the atheist, for whatever reason, I don't know why it's so important to have the exact term atheist, but they insist that they are actually atheists when they have a position that's normally defined as agnosticism. But whatever, right? They want to claim something. I can't force them to stop claiming the term. All I can do is force them to have a conversation, which is what I would do with this internet atheist. So before giving any evidence, right, they always demand evidence. But before you do that, you got to force them to set the standards. So they can't just play the game, right? They can't just play the "that doesn't count as evidence" game, because they have defined the standard. Or alternatively, if you want to be more confrontational or take them on directly, you make them prove they're human beings. So the atheist comes into the chat and they're like, "Prove to me that there is a God." And you say, "I'd be happy to," right after you prove they're a human being. And then you play the same game. They're like, "What do you mean? I'm on YouTube typing right now." "How do I know you're not a computer? How do I know you're a bot?" "Well, I'll fly over there and come to your house." "How do I know you're not a hologram? How do I know I'm not in a simulation, trapped in a computer, and I'm just a mind in a vat somewhere?" So it's kind of silly, but it forces them to see what they're doing, see the game that they're playing and play their own game.
Yeah, no, they need to define what evidence is because, as you say, otherwise they will reject everything. So, what is the standard of evidence that we can meet? And what is odd is when I talk about the history of atheism by very proud, very educated atheists that atheists appeal to historically, like the people of the Enlightenment, like the philosophers of the Enlightenment, they were devout atheists. They were rabid atheists. They are the atheists that people appeal to historically as the example of good atheists. And yet, when you start talking about their history of immorality, of murder, of genocide, of political corruption, then suddenly those are not correct atheists. Those are the wrong atheists. And then they want to, oh, prove to me God exists. And that's a deflection from the fact that we're not discussing whether or not God exists. We're looking at the history of atheism, because the history of atheism is vile and corrupt. And also, if I can just take a moment, that is just to, there was something I wanted to show to. Sorry, I just made the wrong mistake. I clicked the wrong button. Someone asked me about atheism and communism. This is Lenin saying that we do not and should not set forth our atheism in our program, that atheists should not generally be upfront about their beliefs because they want to ally with theists, with Christians. However, this doesn't mean that they accept Christian beliefs. They want to use them for their purposes and then co-opt them, subvert them. We shall always preach the scientific world outlook, and it is essential for us to combat the inconsistency of Christians. Down with religion and long live atheism. Now, this is Lenin. Of course, he wasn't a true atheist, but I want you to look at these quotes from Lenin here. Atheism is a natural and inseparable part of Marxism, the theory and the practice of scientific socialism. Now, he just spoke of scientific atheism. The term scientific atheism is a Marxist-Leninist term, right? And atheists all claim to be scientific atheists. The basis for Marxism is absolutely atheistic and hostile to religion. And atheism is an integral part of Marxism, and we must carry on propaganda in favor of atheism. And our program necessarily includes the propaganda of atheism, the publication of the appropriate scientific literature. And now, this is just a sampling. So someone mentioned about the atheists claiming they're not Marxists. Well, an atheist may not be a Marxist. However, his ideology aligns with that of Marxism. So it's not opposed to Marxism in any way. It doesn't prevent it in any way. There's nothing that goes against it, right? And also, it should be noted that I've asked atheists, how does your propaganda differ from that of Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot? How does your propaganda against Christianity differ from these major totalitarian genocidal leaders? I've yet to receive an answer, but the correct answer is it does not. It's exactly the same propaganda. So therefore, effectively, they are Marxists. Your thoughts on that, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I would agree that, well, obviously I think that Lenin is doing something evil, but I would agree with the principle here that you have to get rid of religion, you have to get rid of Christianity specifically in order to accomplish the aims of the state, the communist state, because religion stands opposed to what they have to say. And they can't just come out and say that. So they have to pretend that, we're okay with religion. It's not that bad for a little while. And then you get in power, and then suddenly it is violently eliminated from society, as happened in Russia and China
Yeah.
when the
Yeah.
communist governments took over.
And before someone claims that Stalin was a Christian, was a Catholic, Stalin was Georgian Orthodox, but he was kicked out of two seminaries. And also, when Lenin came to power in 1917, there were more than 50,000. There were approximately 54,000 Orthodox churches in Russia. By 1939, under Stalin, there was less than 1,000 churches. So Stalin wasn't exactly trying to save Christianity.
Yeah, someone gave that same response to me that Stalin, who I mentioned later in this presentation, was, I don't remember if they said a Christian or they said he was a theist. And I'm like, okay, why? Right? Just because he was born into a Christian family doesn't mean he's a Christian. And by that definition, that same atheist talking to me is probably a Christian.
Christian.
So very strange definitions going on. You have to look at what he actually believed. And he was quite explicit in his writings about his rejection of religion.
Yep. I can actually, there's actually a great biography of Stalin by one of his closest school friends who was at seminary, went to school, well, who knew him as a teenager up until he was an older man. One of his closest friends, and Stalin explicitly rejects the church, rejects Christ, rejects the Bible, and he's into Darwin. He's seriously into Darwin. So yeah.
Exactly. All right. So that's how you deal with the internet atheist. Usually you probably won't get anywhere, and that's okay. Don't waste your time talking to someone who has zero interest in the truth, right? This is someone who is very happy to just play a stupid game like a small little child. So let's come to regular atheists and start by asking this question: is atheism coherent? So there's a reason why these online atheists always talk about denial, right? That they always try to deny evidence, they try to redefine terms, and that's because there's not really any good evidence for atheism. So they know the only way to play the game, the only way to quote unquote win, is to stay on the defensive, or I mean, stay on the offensive, where the other person has to do all the work. They don't have to defend anything. Well, it's really easy to win when you don't have to defend anything. You can just deny whatever the other person brings. But if atheism is actually the positive belief that there's no God, then it must support itself. So there's a classic analogy by Bernard Russell, a famous atheist, that religion, or believing in religion, is like believing in a teapot floating between the Earth and Mars. And obviously you can't see it, right? It's just a tiny little teapot out there. And thus, it's perfectly rational not to believe in it. And he says that religion's basically the same thing, that there's no evidence for it. You can't see it. It would be silly to believe in it. But in fact, theism isn't based on blind belief. It's based on the preponderance of evidence. There are many good, positive reasons to believe Christianity specifically is the truth, not part of today's presentation, the specifics of it. But there are many good, positive reasons. And the only reason I'm not going over them is because if I went over all the reasons to believe in theism, we'd be here until next Sunday, speaking continuously, right? There's tons of evidence. And in other times, in other places, I'd be happy to give some of that evidence. Meanwhile, there's zero evidence for atheism. So there's a good, and actually, the teapot, there's a good reason to believe there isn't a teapot in space. It's not the same
Right.
scenario.
Well, Bertrand
A
Russell also
teapot
claimed
is,
that during the Spanish Inquisition, 9 million witches were killed. That's like literally half the population of Europe at the time.
mm-hmm. So the teapot, a teapot is something that a human being makes, right? You don't just expect there to be a teapot. Like, let's pretend that there were aliens on some other planet. You wouldn't expect them to have a teapot because it's something specific to human beings that we've made. And for there to be a teapot in space, there would have to be a human being who sent it into space. Well, we have a history of what human beings have done. And even if we didn't have that history, why would someone send it there? So there's no good reason to be looking for a teapot in the first place, whereas there
Yeah.
is good reason to be looking for a God. The world, for example, seems to be designed. That doesn't necessarily prove that it's designed or that there's an all-powerful deity, but it's a good reason to be looking for a deity. So we're not on an analogous situation whatsoever. So this slide looks kind of scary. I put conditional and Bayesian probability at the top here. But what Bayesian probability is basically you have so in normal probability, right, you have a dice and you're predicting a future event. Bayesian probability is you see that there's a 6 on the dice. It's already been rolled. And you're trying to figure out what the probability of that occurrence is. So this is basically looking at the world that we currently live in and asking if this is what a world with a God would look like. What does the evidence of this world suggest about the God, God, gods, or lack of God in the formation of the universe. So we ask the question, if there's no God at all, what would we expect the world to look like? And if there was a single creator God, what would we expect the world to look like? And what about if there was multiple creator or gods, or multiple competing gods, or the universe is eternal, but the gods are working and created humanity for various purposes, whatever. So I saw a comment on probably Twitter. I don't remember for sure, but I believe it was on Twitter, that the Marvel comic series proves that there is no God. And they basically were invoking a Bayesian probability. And they're saying, why does it disprove that there's a God? Because it shows us what a world like a God, or a world with a God, would look like. Now, they've made some really bad assumptions. Well, first of all, even in the universe, right? Even in the Marvel universe, most people probably don't have any awareness of these superheroes are doing. But more importantly, this isn't a universe that has anything to do with what the Christian worldview is. This is a universe where there are multiple beings that are super powerful, and they're doing battle with one another, and you're seeing effects of that in the universe. Some of them are good, and some of them are evil. But that's not what the supposition of Christianity is at all. So even if their argument works, all it does is disprove a polytheistic universe with gods that are battling it out with one another. It has nothing to do with Christianity. So with these questions in mind, what does this universe look like? We have some evidence that we need to consider. Turns out we have a good amount of evidence that we need to consider. In any worldview, whether atheism, Christianity, Islam, some other religion, needs to explain these observations, these undeniable facts about the universe. Starting with, I exist. Doesn't seem like all that significant, but in fact, it already tells you a lot, that I exist. And I know that I exist because it tells you, one, that there's something, right? That there's not nothing. There's not just very simple particles. In fact, there's complex matter, which is actually quite unlikely when you just think about what a universe without a God would be. And all you would expect is very random, simple particles, and you wouldn't expect anything complex. Additionally, the fact that I exist and I can make that statement means that I think, means that I have a mind, means that I am capable of making complex observations about the world, which again seems improbable on a purely naturalistic standpoint. Second piece of evidence is that all human societies have believed in a spiritual world. Now, atheists will sometimes use this as evidence against God. They'll say that, you see, this is just part of being a human, and people have invented all kinds of different ideas, and you have no reason to believe that your ideas are the correct ones. But actually, if we think about it, if there was a God, would he endow us with spiritual belief or not? Well, he would. So that means even if we grant, for the sake of argument, that in an atheist worldview, it's random chance whether you believe in something or not, it still provides more evidence for a creator. Because if there was a creator, you would say there's 100% chance that he would want people to believe in him, or at least, a very strong probability. Maybe you could imagine a creator that wants to remain hidden and there's only 95% probability or something, but it's still a very good piece of evidence.
I mean, a couple of points on that. One, atheists will state that atheism is the default position. But if we go back in history, as far as humans have history, we realize that the earliest of our monuments, of our architecture, is religious in nature. Our earliest artifacts are religious, which means that religion has always been with us. And also, if we assume that, so atheism being the default position, atheism is defined as in opposition to theism. Now, if there was no theism, there would be no theism to be opposed to. So atheism only arises in the context of the existence, the pre-existence of theism. So therefore, that argument in itself is incoherent because it's an opposition to an existing position. Atheism did not come first because otherwise, then theists would be atheists. They'd be in opposition, would be atheists or whatever the word would be for that. B theists, C theists, D theists. I don't know, but we would be the ones in opposition to atheism, and what's that? There's no word for that. Doesn't that make sense? That is.
Yeah, and I think that at least an honest atheist would admit that theism came first in the development of humans, and they say, "Well, we've evolved beyond it now. We don't need religion anymore," which is kind of strange. I mean, I don't see any monkeys going around having religion, so this idea that somehow the pinnacle of evolution from a naturalistic perspective, human beings, the smartest creature to ever exist invents something that's stupid and shouldn't exist, basically,
But also
is the idea.
but then there's determinism. If they believe that basically atoms knocking together and chemicals sloshing together create thoughts, then why is the majority of the world, for the majority of history, been theistic? Well, why is like
Yeah,
70% of
exactly.
the world theistic? And also if we are just predeterministic meat robots and we have no control over what we think because it's all predetermined, then why are they complaining? Because the universe is clearly 70+% biased towards religion. I mean, they just have to live with that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's one of the natural laws of the universe, apparently, that we're inclined to religion, and that's just a odd observation that you just have to accept. And they can make that argument. They can logically say that it's just some really bizarre chance. But the point here, and with Bayesian probability in general, is what does the evidence best fit, right? So the fact that human beings believe in deities doesn't prove there is a deity. I don't want any atheist saying that I made that argument, but rather it's evidence that better fits with a theistic worldview. And it's not just the right. It's not a piece of evidence in isolation. It's not like all the rest of the evidence. If all the rest of the evidence suggested atheism, then we would probably logically and reasonably conclude that it was some random stupid chance. But if the vast majority of evidence points one way, we can't just keep dismissing everything as, well,
Yeah,
that's unlikely, but
yeah.
atheism is true, therefore that's what it says,
Well,
right?
but there's an interesting philosophical argument also that's been made. For instance, the fact that we experience hunger tells us that the universe has such a thing as food. The fact that you experience cold means that there's such a thing as warmth. It implies there's relief for a particular feeling, that it's a reaction to something that exists. So if you're hungry, this means that food is a real possibility. The fact that you want justice and you want fairness means that these things are real, right? It means that it presupposes their existence, that we want those things. Therefore, those shall we say, those metaphysical properties seem to be integral parts of the universe, and atheists simply dismiss this. I mean, but they claim that logic exists, but then logic is metaphysical. They should reject that too. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
incoherent. Atheism is complete incoherence.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. But let's look at the rest of
Yep,
the
sure.
evidence that we have to account for. So, also, people naturally think in terms of good and evil. The atheist, if they're being honest, they'll tell you there is no such thing as good and evil in their system. And then they'll turn around 5 minutes later and tell you that Christianity is evil.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Right? It's really hard to escape it, right? You can give lip service to the idea that good and evil don't exist, but then you look at things in the world and you have a much stronger reaction than I don't like that. You say that is evil. Likewise, you have a much stronger reaction to good things, like say the love of a family member, than I like that. Rather, you say, this is very good. This is the way things are supposed to be, which makes a lot more sense under a theistic position than an atheistic one. Additionally, the universe has a beginning. I recently had an atheist call into one of my shows, and he tried to play the usual game, right? He tried to play the there is no evidence game. And uh, after we after I forced him to set a standard, he said that he wanted physical evidence. I said, well, there's good physical evidence that the universe has a beginning. And his statement was, I don't believe there was a beginning to the universe. I believe that it was eternal. Just blind statement of belief, but he was correct in one sense, that if atheism is true, that's what you would expect. You would expect an eternal universe, because there's no way in atheism to get from a beginning, or at least no easy way to get from a beginning to where we are now, because how do you start, right? How do you start without anything? And thus, the universe, if atheism is true, would most likely be eternal. And in theism, at least in Christianity, different theistic systems do have different beliefs about the universe. But in Christianity, it's quite explicit. In the beginning, God said, right? And thus, this is more consistent with a Christian worldview than an atheistic worldview. Now, additionally, when the creation of the universe occurs, we don't just get matter, we get time, and we get natural laws. Natural laws are kind of weird. Well, very weird under atheism, in that you would expect that if everything's just random chance, that natural laws are not really existing, that there's just chaos, that you can't predict anything because things are just moving about randomly, and you never know what's going to happen. And this is actually how non-Christian systems looked at the world in ancient times.
Well,
This is the
Greek
reason why
paganism
science.
certainly did that.
Exactly. Exactly. The classic pagan systems, they thought that the universe was chaotic and unpredictable, and only Christianity offered the environment in which science could evolve, where people expected the world to be predictable, expected there to be natural laws, because they believed that there was a single creative force behind it who itself is consistent. Thus, the world should be consistent.
Well, but the idea of
Additionally,
natural law and even scientific law comes from the religious concept that there is a lawgiver that has set law in the world. So that idea that they appeal to actually is a religious concept based on the Christian idea that there's a lawgiver that is rational, that and the world is reasonable.
exactly. Additionally, in addition to there being natural laws, these natural laws are very finely tuned, and they seem to be finely tuned specifically for human life on the planet Earth, which is very strange. The atheist will say, "Oh, I don't care what the probability is." I've had many atheists say this to me. I don't care how improbable it is. I don't care how unlikely it is that all the natural laws be perfectly aligned. The only reason that they're perfectly aligned for us is because we're here, i.e., the laws were set, and then we came to be because of the laws. But that's still very inconsistent, right? So they can say that. They can say, "Oh, I don't care if it's a number so astronomically large that it's impossible even to describe in terms that have any meaning to human beings," which is true, by the way. As long as we're here, that's good evidence that the laws, that it was blind chance. Okay. Again, we're saying which is more correct, or which is more likely, that a creative being that would set the laws in such a way that human beings would be here, or that blind chance set the laws in such a way that human beings would be here. I guess either is possible, but which one does the evidence better fit? Which one makes more sense? And then finally, another one that atheists bring up from time to time is, "Oh, there was 100 million gods in the ancient world." Not an accurate number, but there's thousands at least. There's thousands of gods in the ancient world. You don't believe in any of those gods, so you should stop believing in the one God you do believe in. However, if Christianity is true, right, would we expect that over time all the false gods die out and only the one God, the pretty much only national God associated with monotheism, that has come to dominate the world? So there's many polytheistic systems, many people, different pagan systems with many different deities. What are the chances that the one monotheistic God would declare that he's going to conquer the world, not through military means, but by the truth, and then achieve that? Odd, right? Completely consistent with the idea that Christianity is true. Not proof that it's true. Again, Nothing's based on proof, right? I'm not saying anything's absolute proof of anything. I'm saying the rational thing is to look at the evidence and see what the evidence fits. And if, a priori, if there's a creator God, this is exactly what we would expect to happen, is that his religion would dominate false religions and come to dominate the world. If atheism was true and it was just, a whole bunch of random gods that people imagined on their own, we would probably expect one of two things. We would either expect some random polytheistic system to win out, since there was way, way, way more polytheistic systems than there were monotheistic systems, or we would expect that all of them to die out and be replaced by other ones, and that over time, the religious beliefs of people are just constantly changing. New ideas are developing continuously, which is not actually, neither of which is the case of historical reality. So this isn't all of the evidence, sorry. This is a good chunk of evidence that needs to be explained in any worldview. And to counter this, right, the atheists can't just say, I deny all these things. Well, I mean, they can, but if they're going to be reasonable, rational beings, they can't just deny all this evidence, sit up there and pretend like they have nothing to defend. They need to come up with evidence that is superior to the evidence that suggests that we have a monotheistic creator, and specifically that Christianity is true. I didn't even give my primary arguments for why Christianity specifically is true, because this isn't a talk about Christianity. It's a talk about atheism. But all this evidence does not fit with a naturalistic, materialistic, atheistic universe. It is way more consistent with a single creator God. So atheists have to come up with some counter evidence, and they do, right? When you talk to non-internet atheists, they will typically give some sort of explanation or ideas for why atheism is true. And the most common explanation is that there is suffering in the world. Classically stated, the problem of evil is as follows. If God is all good, he should want to eliminate suffering. If he's all powerful, he should be able to do it. Why then do we observe suffering? And this does create a real problem. And suffering in the world is definitely something that theists have to explain. But here's the thing. It's just as much of a problem for atheists, because the atheist has to assume that there's actual evil in order to prove that there's no actual good. He has to assume that suffering is an evil and not just something that you dislike. If it's not evil, if suffering is just something you dislike, then it's no different than, say, I don't like strawberry ice cream. The existence of strawberry ice cream isn't something that disproves the good. It's just something I don't like. And if
Right.
suffering isn't actually evil, then you're in the same scenario where the atheist doesn't have any reason to deny good. They just have something they don't like. Additionally, polytheism offers a very easy solution to the problem of suffering. The idea that gods aren't all good. There might be some gods who are good, and then there's other gods who are evil, or maybe all the gods are complex beings who are not purely good, that they're partially good and partially evil. Perfectly easy, rationalistic explanation. So why then, to suffering, lead people to conclude that atheism is true? Shouldn't
But
it make
Thaddeus,
people
don't you find
conclude?
that atheists who present this argument of why doesn't God, the fairy godmother, grant my every wish, give me a bicycle of the color that I want, and why doesn't he help me to get a date on prom night? Because and why didn't he help me get the pocket money that I wanted or the job? Don't you find that they tend to present a very fairy godmother slash genie of the lamp type god that they want favors from because they're special?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I think that it's partially due to a misunderstanding of what God
Yeah, but
is.
there's a
And
bit
you
of a
see this
me,
is
me,
in other
me.
ways in
Why didn't
atheism all
God
the
do
time.
special things for me? Why didn't, I'm
Hmm.
special. I should get what I want. I want to have what I want, and God should do things for me because, that you get this feeling. There's a whiner there that's trying to, get special favors.
Yeah, exactly. And it manifests in other ways as well, where the atheist will say, why isn't prayer always answered? Why does God allow babies to die or people to be sick? And it boils down to God should give me what I want when I want it, right? That's ultimately what it boils down to.
God does answer prayers. I asked for a Porsche the other day. He said no. So, can I show something on
Exactly.
this slides quickly? This
Yeah,
is from
sure.
Jordan Sobel. It was regarded. This is in the Cambridge textbook. Arguments for and against beliefs in God, called Logic and Theism. And this is actually a he was regarded as the most capable atheistic philosopher before Graham Oppie, before he died. He says, if one takes up the task of providing sound arguments for atheism, formidable difficulties arise. It is much easier to punch holes in theistic arguments than to actually argue for the truth of atheism. And that's what he says. And then he says, when the latter is undertaken, we find that the needs of and the problems of the atheist are parallel to those of the theist. To impose the same restrictions upon the atheist is to show that the position is at least as inadequately defended as theism. And atheism is no less a matter of faith than theism. And this is from a top academic textbook from what was regarded as the top atheist academic of the time.
Yeah, some rare honesty there. I agree completely with his statements. And having talked to countless atheists over the years, I find this very much true on an average level. The only difference between the average atheist and the average theist in terms of level of argument or quality or intelligence or anything like that is the atheist thinks that he's super awesome, that he is the most intelligent being in the world, whereas the average Christian understands that they are a imperfect being with imperfect arguments, and that having belief is an element of religion. That's not to say that religion is blind belief without good reason, but rather that you can't prove anything in an absolute sense. And thus there is an element of saying, okay, all the evidence points one direction. I'm going to take that step and trust the accuracy of the evidence, because you can always deny the evidence. You could say that super powerful aliens are trying to trick us, and thus why all the evidence seems to point in one direction. Or classically, that's more of a modern idea, but classically, that a demon is doing it, that a evil being is trying to trick us. And you can't really argue against that, right? You can't really find any evidence against it, but you also can't find any evidence for it. So the rational thing to do is go where the evidence leads, and with the background assumption that our observations are correct, which incidentally is the fundamental assumption of all science, that you can't do science without assuming that you have the ability to make accurate observations of the world. Buddhism often denies the existence of the physical world, that they would say that it's all an illusion. Can you prove it's not an illusion? I mean, you can't really, but you also can't provide any evidence that it's an illusion. So the rationalistic thing to do, the scientific thing to do, is to look at the evidence, assume that the evidence is reliable, and come to conclusions. Getting back to the problem of evil, in addition to the fact that this would, if anything, this would support polytheism, not atheism, Christianity also has very good answers to the problem of evil, to the reason why there's suffering in this world. In fact, it is the main theme, right, of the Bible is that humanity fell, that the world isn't the way it's supposed to be, that we expect there to be pain and suffering in the world. And it's because God has chosen to endow us with free will, the opportunity to reject him, but on the flip side, the opportunity to accept him. That it seems that suffering is a natural consequence of giving people the ability to love, the ability to freely choose the good of another. Additionally, uh, in addition to everything I said above, in academics, the problem of evil is not seen as a good argument. The strong form, the one that evil rules out the existence of a good God, is rejected broadly in philosophy. That over time, philosophers have come to realize, and by philosophers I mean including atheist philosophers, that this is not a strong argument because there are alternate explanations. It's simply a piece of evidence that might count for the atheistic side. So you have all that evidence that I provide on this first side, and then you have a fairly weak piece of evidence in the problem of
I
evil
mean, atheists are
on
claiming
the
to answer some
side.
very big questions. Atheists can't even define what a woman is.
Oh, it looks like I just saw a comment from Steven. What happened to Thaddeus? Looks like, I don't know. It looks fine from my end, but on the broadcast, it's just showing the Skype symbol. So as long as you can hear me, I'm not really concerned. So if people could let me know that I'm still being heard,
I
then
can hear you
we'll
just
continue on.
fine. Who's not hearing you?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay. Yep, everyone can hear me. So
Yeah, you know,
not a big
YouTube
deal if they can't
YouTube
see my
plays with
face.
my channel. I get weirdness like this. It's something YouTube does. So, but you sound just fine.
All right. Yeah, don't worry about my picture. Don't know what happened there, but as long as you can hear me and you can see my slides, you don't need to see my face anyway. All right. So the next argument advanced for atheism is the God of the gaps argument. It usually goes something like this, and it usually is lightning that they use as an example. Ancient people used to believe lightning comes from the gods, and this is somehow supposed to be evidence that Christianity is false because ancient people had a wrong belief. Or, put more bluntly, they'll say that the ancient people were stupid and that they had no clue about science and the physical reality and all those great things that we've discovered. And basically, they're just a bunch of barely better than apes walking around. Oh, I believe in religion. Oh. Of course, this argument is completely and totally logically invalid. The reason why someone holds a belief has no bearing, or sorry, the fact that someone had an incorrect belief about something has no bearing on their other beliefs. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that every single person in the ancient world used to believe that lightning comes from gods. That doesn't mean any other belief that they had was false. That because they thought something wrong about one thing doesn't mean that they thought wrong about other things by any means. Indeed, every single atheist, no doubt, has some wrong beliefs. Are they going to tell us that the rest of their beliefs should be discarded as well because they were wrong about something? I would certainly hope they wouldn't say that. But more importantly, this misunderstands the case for theism. We're not taking God and putting him in the gaps of our knowledge. We're not saying that, Christianity is true because we don't understand dark matter. No one would say that, right? Literally no one in the world would ever say that. Rather, our argument for the truth of Christianity is based on
So,
the evidence we do have. It's not based on a gap, it's based on our knowledge, which then leads the atheist to ironically appeal to what I call science of the gaps. Yeah, we don't understand how natural laws could be so finely tuned right now, but someday we'll figure that out.
yeah. Did we just lose
Okay.
your image, Thaddeus? I'm not seeing your image. I'm just seeing the Skype logo.
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to earlier.
No, because I saw
We
your
lost
image.
my
It's just
image.
now I've come up. Wow.
Yeah, maybe it's going in and out. I don't know. All I can see is on my end, it looks fine. Looks like I'm sending you the image. So I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on, but so anyway, as I was saying, the atheist has to appeal to science of the gaps. They have to dismiss the evidence by saying we'll discover a scientific explanation for the evidence later on. So they, on one hand, accuse the Christian of inventing a god to fill in the evidence, and then they invent something. Let's not call it a god because they're atheists, but they invent something to fill in the gaps that their knowledge, the gaps in the knowledge, or supposed gaps in the knowledge, that theism explains perfectly. Interesting.
Yeah, but that's also a matter of faith. I mean, that actually comes down to faith, atheistic
Mm-hmm.
faith.
Yes, they have very strong faith in their naturalistic worldview against and contrary to the evidence. Interesting. All right, let's get their next argument. And you actually alluded to this earlier, that everyone is born an atheist. Or put differently, if you were born in India, you'd probably be a Hindu. If you were born, the only reason you're a Christian is because you were born in a Christian society. If you're born in the Middle East, you'd be a Muslim. If you're born in India, you'd be a Hindu, blah, 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 blah. Well, so what? Right? I mean, I think that's factually true. I think that factually speaking, most people have the same beliefs as their parents. But so what? That doesn't make it logically valid. The reason you hold a belief has no bearing on whether that belief is true or not. You can believe something is true and be correct and have a very stupid reason for believing in it. You can also believe something that's incorrect, have a very good reason for believing in it, and still be wrong. So whether something is true or not doesn't have any relationship to why you believe it. And additionally, the argument is just really, really silly. Because it wouldn't be used for anything else ever. No one would go around and say that the only reason that you believe in a heliocentric solar system is because you were born in a well-educated society today. If you were born in a different time period in a different society, you would believe in geocentrism. So you have no reason whatsoever to believe that heliocentrism is true, because you only believe that because you're born in a society where the education system makes you believe that. How
Right.
silly, right? But it's
Agreed.
exactly parallel. It's exactly parallel to the argument against theism. And then additionally, lots of people, myself included, and most atheists, have changed their beliefs over time. So it doesn't really matter what you're born into, right? It doesn't matter what your parents raised you. You will still make your own choices. And although most people have a similar belief to their parents, most people probably don't have exactly identical beliefs to their parents. But let's look at that alternate, right? We're all born atheists, just like we're all born Muslims. We're all born atheists, and then society corrupts us and changes our minds, takes us out of Islam or takes us out of atheism. Hey, I say fine. You want to be the religion of unthinking babies who are incapable of complex rational thoughts? Then have at it. Atheism is the religion for babies. Got it. Don't deny it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good argument. That's yeah, and they're using an Islamic argument. Yeah, everyone was. That is an assertion. I mean, what is the logical claim for that? What is the logical evidence for this claim?
Well, remember, they've redefined atheism as the lack of belief. And I would say that a newborn baby probably doesn't have any beliefs. That would make them, I mean, it wouldn't really even make them agnostic because they literally have no thoughts. Unless you're saying that a rock is an atheist too, or, a tree or a monkey, they're all atheists. Well, fine. You just make an atheism look stupider and stupider. So that would be the reason for that. But of course, if it is correctly defined as a positive belief there is no God, then babies certainly are not atheists either. What about the case of many failed gods? I did also allude to this a little bit earlier, that they'll go around and say that I'm an atheist about Zeus, you're an atheist about Zeus, we're all atheists about Zeus. The only difference between you and I is that I'm an atheist about one more God than you are. That there were many gods, they all failed except for one. Well, again, this is logically invalid. The proof should be exclusive. The fact that many false beliefs are no longer believed has no relationship to whether or not the beliefs that are still held are true.
Yeah,
And
but we've examined
if you,
those beliefs and we've decided those are actually myths, not actual, not scientific facts that are being presented.
Mhm.
And if atheism is just a lack of belief, then why do they have a comment to make about the truth or validity of Christianity? Because they supposedly don't have beliefs. They just have a lack of belief. So that's just a void in their understanding. But there are a couple of issues with that. One, if you don't know about, well, people didn't know about koala bears. You so you lacked belief because it wasn't part of your universe. And once you've seen a koala bear, you now have a belief. It's not like you make a choice to believe it. It exists. You see it. Now you can lack a belief in it. You can but that would be an active rejection of the evidence in front of your face, right? So, but atheism claims it makes no truth statements because of just a lack of belief. Yet they want to make truth statements about their beliefs, and they want to make truth statements about your beliefs. So really, that's a conflict there because that's a contradiction. So they don't believe in logic because they believe in contradiction.
yeah, definitely. And again, under the background assumption that, or sorry, removing any background assumption, if theism was true, if specifically monotheism was true, what would you expect? Well, you would expect one God to triumph, and that false beliefs would die out. If naturalism was true, is that what you would expect? Not necessarily, right? You would probably either expect no one ever to develop these ideas, that no one would ever be
Mm.
atheist, or you'd expect them to continue to randomly fluctuate because it's not like human beings have changed. You know, our chemical makeup has not changed. Our ability to think hasn't changed. On one of the
Mm-hmm.
previous slides, I said ancient people were stupid. Well, the atheists making that claim, which is totally false. People had just as much ability to think in the first century. They just didn't have as much accumulated technological advantage, but they had just as much ability to think as people do today. But the real question is here is, where's the positive evidence? You said it exactly correctly that we've looked at these beliefs and we've determined them to be false because they have no evidence for them. I've spoken with literally thousands of Muslims, and I've asked them this question: what is your best evidence that Islam is true? And usually they can't provide any. Then they can provide no evidence whatsoever for Islam. Likewise, I'm not seeing anyone providing any good evidence for Zeus or any other belief system, or atheism, by the way. But I am seeing good evidence, positive evidence being presented for Christianity. So it's not analogous to people rejecting belief in Zeus or any other ancient religion that has died out, because there isn't good evidence for those things, and there is good evidence for Christianity. An alternate way of basically conveying the same idea, the atheist might say, well, what about the tooth fairy or Santa Claus? Isn't believing in God just like believing in the tooth fairy something for children? But once you grow up and you're rational, and that you should stop believing in it. And this actually is very good uh, illustration of the difference between religion and other things. Because when a parent tells their child about the tooth fairy, it's not like they believe that it's true. And it's not even that they're trying to convince their child of something false. Rather, it's more like a game. It's more like a social game that people are playing. And, you can debate whether they should or shouldn't do it, but it's viewed as kind of a fun activity to do with children. No one is conveying the idea that this is real. At no point in time has any person ever told, any adult ever gone around uh, seriously proposing that the tooth fairy exists. Meanwhile, adults are seriously proposing that Christianity is true. We are providing strong, rational reasons to believe it. And we're not just saying it, we're sincerely believing that. So it's not analogous at all. And the atheist is ultimately uh, at a position where they are making a logically invalid argument. All of the arguments, so we said that suffering provides a slight bit of evidence. The rest of the arguments presented, or commonly presented by atheists, provide no evidence whatsoever, that they are totally invalid, illogical, stupid things to say. And this is a complete list of all the arguments that I commonly hear for atheism. I'm not saying it's every argument that exists in the world, but it's every argument that's commonly made I have covered here, and found them all to be lacking and all but suffering to be completely and totally meaningless. That only a completely irrational person would cite this as evidence at all. So then let's go back to the problem of evil or suffering, because this is something that actually needs to be answered. I did say on the first slide that this is a problem, right? This is something that needs an answer. So right now, we see lots of evidence for religion, and we see a tiny bit of evidence against it. So let's not just leave it there, right? Already rationally speaking, you would say, well, even if I don't have a good explanation for evil, then I still have much more evidence for the truth of Christianity and theism, so I should rationally believe that. But in reality, the main reason that people reject religion is in fact because of evil. You know, they may come up with other reasons, and they may cite one of the other things on this list. They may cite reasons why Christianity is false, contradictions in the Bible, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, nearly all people who are not theists are so because of observed evil, either personal evil in their own life, the death of a loved one, unfairness, that people treating them poorly, or generalized evil, where they look at the world and they say that there's a lot of bad things going on, and as a result, there has to be some explanation. It can't be that there's a good God in charge, so there must be theism must be false. Which really, the problem of evil should only make you question the goodness of God, not the existence. But, you know, people do expect God to be good, which I agree with. God should be good. So you can see how it develops. So I think it is worth spending some time responding to the problem of evil, even though logically speaking, it's not a knockdown great argument for the truth of atheism. So what
just to
about
pause a moment, I have to say, wow, thank you very much. Thank you to Silva Mubasir. Wow, I'm overwhelmed. Thank you very, very much. He says, this is incredible. Thank you. Thank you, Lord, for everything you do, defending our Lord and Savior from these worldly attacks. You're very welcome. I believe that there is good in the world, and what we are doing is demonstrating we have a better answer. There is good, and we are demonstrating what is evil, and these people are promoting evil, you know, these atheists. And yeah, but I don't know what to say. Wow, thank you very much. I'm just very grateful for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Silver. And for everyone else watching today, thank you for your support as well.
Yeah, and thank Thaddeus.
So
he's the one doing the presentation today as well.
Hey, you know, we are one body, one community of believers. So you donating to Lloyd benefits the body just as much as a donation to me would. So I'm very appreciative of that. So let's revisit the problem of evil, and let's see if we can really address this. So it will come in a couple forms. One will be hypocrisy, that religious people do evil things, which is it's not a compelling argument logically, but it's a very compelling argument emotionally, right? If you see someone who's supposed to be the best follower of their God doing evil things, then what does that say about their God? Or what does that say about the effectiveness of their religion? Or they might say that the God of the Bible is evil, that in the Bible there are events described which we would consider evil, that are at least nominally endorsed by God, and thus, well, the God of the Bible might be evil. Maybe he exists, right? Atheists will say this today. They'll say, maybe he exists, but even if he does, I don't want to follow him because he is evil. Very interesting morphing of the argument over time.
But
But again,
what is there? I mean, do they have like an atheist 10 commandments that we can look at? Because every atheist defines atheism for himself. So do they have a standard, a rational standard, or they just make it up as they go? Because that's irrational. That's completely subjective. And then also atheism. I'm doing a series on Darwin. I'm not sure if you're aware. I'm doing a very detailed, an extremely detailed series on Darwin, and Darwinian ethics, Darwinian morals. Quite literally, Darwin writes that whatever helps a group survive and prosper, that is moral. So, and Darwin includes that, and Darwin states that basically warfare, death, brings good because it eliminates obstacles and allows a group to succeed, to prosper, provides them with resources. So therefore, genocide is good. There is nothing in Darwinian evolutionary thinking to go against that. That is quite literally what it says. And he says that the superior races or the favored races will wipe out the inferior races, or it will exploit them and their possessions. So they will be enslaved, or their goods will be taken and they will be utilized. So Darwinism. Do they use Darwinism, which also promote? Well, Darwin was the first eugenicist. So I mean, this is what is their moral stand that they take, and they can't say that well, Christians did evil, therefore Christianity is evil, because we have a set of basic rules that and you can judge the Christian whether he met those rules or violated those rules.
Yeah, exactly. That the atheist has a really hard time defining what good and evil is. As you pointed out, and I agree with, from a naturalistic standpoint. Now, granted, not all atheists are naturalists, but naturalism offers the most intellectually coherent version of atheism. That from a naturalistic standpoint, genocide is good. That as long as it's done against the right people, right? If you genocide people who are physically disabled, that's good. If you genocide people who have limited skills because of their socioeconomic standing, i.e. the poor class, that's good. Because guess what? They're just wasting society's resources. They contribute less than they take from society, and therefore society will be benefited by getting rid of them. And
Correct.
now, I don't think very many atheists are going to come out and say that. Maybe Darwin is willing to say that, but most people won't be willing to say that. And yet, that's the most logical system of ethics under naturalism, is that the weak should be eliminated.
And Darwin was also not using science. Darwin was referencing, again, like the atheists reference pagan Greek philosophy. Darwin was referencing a pagan Greek philosopher who had that philosophy. So it's crazy that they, sorry.
Yeah. It's it's very, very interesting that the main argument against religion is this moral argument, and at the same time, apart from a moral standard set by a good God, you can't really define what is good and evil.
Yeah. And Sam Harris says that that they have this overarching ideology of what so a group should prosper, of what did they say, prosperousness, or he's got a term for that. Thaddeus. Sam Harris uses flourishing, human flourishing. Speaks of human flourishing. So if you steal everyone else's stuff and you kill them and you flourish, then by Sam's definition, that's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, atheism, or I'm sorry, naturalism supports tribalism. What we today might call racism, but historically tribalism, where my own people are superior to others. We should kill and maim and destroy others, take their stuff, and use it for the benefit of our own society. Evolution is in favor of that, because the people who are in your own society, they have the most close genetic resemblance to you, and you want your own genes to be propagated. That's supposedly the only purpose of a biological creature, is to have its own genes propagated. Therefore, it makes absolute complete sense to wage war, assuming you can win, right? Assuming you will win, it makes complete sense to wage war against your neighbors against other people, to destroy them,
Well,
to take as much of their stuff as you can. There's nothing whatsoever in naturalism or evolution to say that that's bad, and indeed it says it's good.
then on that
If you're
basis,
saying that
this
good
means
and evil
that
exist, right?
so so on that basis, it's logical to conclude that atheism then is predicated on successful survival and not on truth. Because then how can an
Mm-hmm.
atheist say that he is working in the pursuit of logic and truth when the major factor underpinning the idea is purely survival? How can they then make the claim that this is based on truth when genetically it's really just about getting ahead?
Exactly. Exactly. There's no logical basis for good and evil in atheism, and the closest you can come is very contrary to what we would call good and evil. And by we, I don't mean theists, I mean human beings in general. That all that said, though, there is really something to be answered here, because again, this is the primary reason that people choose to reject religion. So let's look at the accusations. First of all, evil done in the name of religion, or put differently, there's a bunch of hypocrites in the church. They think they're good, but I'm better than them. Well, first of all, we need to understand that the claims about evil in religion are greatly exaggerated. Specifically, these claims are always only made about Christianity. So, specifically, the claims about Christian history. There is a quote on what happens to be a Islamic philosopher's website that says that during the Spanish Inquisition, an estimated 50 to 68 million people were killed. Now, this number is ridiculous, even for uh, these kinds of claims, but they do usually make claims, not quite 50 million, but they'll say, 5 million, 10 million, something along that lines were killed during the Inquisition. However, this is complete and total nonsense. Henry Common, who is one of the leading experts on the Spanish Inquisition, that's his academic focus, it's his main subject of discussion, so he knows what he's talking about. He looked at all the primary texts, all the period texts, all the evidence, in other words, and he concluded, quote, we can in all probability accept the estimate made on the basis of the available documentation that a maximum of 3,000 persons may have suffered death during the entire history of the tribunal.
Yeah.
So you got people going around claiming that millions of people were put to death during the Spanish Inquisition, and the evidence suggests that it was 3,000 people over a
Yeah, in
period of
fact,
several
some of those
hundred
numbers are
years.
down as low as. Remember, those comments were made in the 90s when those archives were first opened, and they've had another round of examination of those archives not that long ago. Those numbers could be as low as 800. I've seen figures as low as
Right.
800. So
Yeah,
so
he said a
2000 seems to be a reasonable number somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, he said a
And then also
maximum
Mr.
of 3.
Teapot earlier, I mean, remember he said that 9 million women were killed as witches. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
no wonder he's talking about teapots in space. The man's head's in space, in the teapot. Yeah,
Indeed,
Thaddeus, how
that's
many
my next
slides do you have
example.
left? Because I try not to go like over an hour and a half on my channel generally. What's
Yeah, we're close to the end.
okay?
We got 5 slides left, but that includes the conclusion, and several of the remaining slides are very brief. My other example, which you just alluded to, is 9 million witches. This figure is thrown around all the time.
Yeah, and
However,
also
actual
that's over
experts,
400 years, as someone said. But in fact, it's more than 400. It's more like 600 years. So if you take 3,000 people over 600 years, right, that's like 5 people a year or something. But if you look at 87 years in the 20th century, atheists killed 150, 250 million people in just 87 years.
Mm-hmm. And the reality is, but the best estimates today are maybe around 50,000 people were involved in the witch trials over, again, a period of several hundred years. Now, that's not to say that these 50,000 people or 2,000 people in the Inquisition, that their lives don't matter, that they, that somehow justifies what happened to them. It doesn't. But at the same time, if atheists have to greatly exaggerate the numbers, that probably tells you something about the validity of their claims. Meanwhile, they say that nearly all wars are caused by religion, and in fact, the reality is the exact opposite. Lloyd looked at the Big Book of Wars, I think it was called,
I'm
and
just showing it.
tabulated up. And
This is most wars here. I've got it on the screen. Islam
Mhm.
compared to, so the blue here is all other religions. This is Islam alone. So um, Christianity included here. So 3.8% of all deaths in all warfare, well, all warfare is from all religions. Then this 93% is secular wars. Islam is 3.2% on its own, and then all other religions on earth in history, 3.8%. And then I used here the Big Book of Horrible Things, which religion doesn't really feature much. And then, of course, if you look at the World War One and Two, yeah. So basically, yeah,
so
this is
I'll
what,
have to,
yeah.
I'll have to
Sorry,
revise my slide there. I put 95%, but it looks like it's more precisely 93%. But the
yeah.
point is, of course, the same, that very little of war is caused by religion. As you've already said, the atheist regimes in Russia, China, and Cambodia killed more than all of Christian history combined. All Christian wars, all Christian governments, all witch trials, all
Plus all
everything.
non-Christian wars, all warfare.
Yes, and all non-Christian wars over a period of 100 or so years, 120 years. They killed more people than the rest of human history combined. Now, what about child predators in the church? This is another one that we get a lot, that Catholicism is evil because the priests molested children, and I'm not by any means diminishing that. That is definitely a tragedy, but the reality of the situation is that nearly all child abuse, well, I shouldn't say nearly all, a strong majority of child abuse comes from friends of the family, people who are either relatives or people who are such a close friend that they're treated like a relative, because that's how they have access to the child, and people who have experience, strange term, but have experience molesting children. They learn that this is how you get access to a child, is from family friends. And then beyond that, school teachers are the next most common abuser of children. So why exactly are religious figures being signaled out? Well, it's because no one wants to admit that their school teacher might abuse their child. But if you say a religious person might do it, that gives you a reason to reject religion. And of course, evil is the expectation of the Bible, that we live in a fallen world. We are creatures in rebellion to God. We expect evil in the world. But here's the thing: atheism offers no solution to this. However, Christianity does. That there is hope. God is triumphant in the end. He provides a means to escape our evil and then carries it out. So my last few slides focus on the other argument: was God evil? I'll go through these fairly quickly. Obviously, a lot could be said about these things. But generally, people will say that God is evil for one of three things: the conquest of Canaan, the doctrine of atonement, or hell. Now, the conquest of Canaan, we need to understand that there's a historical background to this. God didn't just randomly one day say, go kill all your enemies, nor did he say, go subjugate the people of Canaan in the name of Islam. I mean Christianity, I mean Judaism, right? So there's a historical background. People had a long history of rebellion against God, and they were doing horrific things, not just things that you or I would consider horrific, but things that everyone in the modern world would consider horrific. Then additionally, to the historical context, you have to ask about the moral context. Who has the right to take a human life? Regardless of how you feel about capital punishment, I think everyone would acknowledge that there's a substantial difference between me going out and killing someone and the government, after proper trial and whatnot, uh, chance for appeals, blah, 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 executing someone for committing a heinous crime. I think everyone would agree that at minimum there's a substantial difference between those two. How much more so then does God have the right to take a human life? If all life belongs to God, then he has the right to take it. I worked at a big box store in my teen years, and as part of orientation, the security guard's like, I'll arrest anyone I catch stealing. I don't care if they're a woman, a child, disabled, whatever. And, I don't care if it's the mayor of the city. I will arrest anyone I find stealing, except if the owner of the store comes in here and takes something off the shelf, I allow him to walk out the door, because guess what? The goods ultimately belong to him, and our lives ultimately belong to God, so he has the right to take them. And even in addition to that, there's also good evidence that the language is exaggerated. It was using a common literary device at the time. Any victory in war is described as total annihilation of the people. And we do use this even today, right? Like, my sports team destroyed that team. They annihilated them. They killed them. Does that mean that there was bodies all over the floor at the end of the game, and that our team will never play another game of basketball in their life? Of course not. And we see the same in the Bible, where we see that God commands the Israelites to go kill every man, woman, child, and sometimes animals of a particular group. The Bible says they went out and they killed every man, woman, and child of a particular group. And then 2 chapters later, you see people of that group still alive, which means they didn't kill everyone, which means that it was exaggerated language and not actually genocide in modern terms.
Also the Syriac language, Aramaic language, is also very hyperbolic in its usage. It also tends to be hyperbolic. So even in the New Testament, you have this element of hyperbolic language to exaggerate, to make a point. It's actually a feature of the language. So people also read those as literal and make mistakes.
Exactly. What about the doctrine of atonement? People will say that it's unjust. Muslims especially will say that it's unjust for God to send Jesus to die for our sins. The idea of substitutionary atonement is seen as reprehensible. But we see even in human law, right? Even in human law, we recognize the possibility of atonement. If I am in big legal trouble because I didn't pay my taxes for years, and now I'm facing jail time. Let's say I owe $20,000 in back taxes. I'm facing jail time. Well, maybe my parents or my uncle or a really good friend, they step in and they say, you know what? I'm going to pay that debt on your behalf. Does the court allow that? Yes, they do, right? Because the government wants their money. And then guess what? The legal penalties drop as well. You no longer have to go to jail for owing money on your back taxes because they've been paid. Now you say that, well, that's just money, right? We're talking about much more significant things. We don't allow you to atone for someone else's death, for example, and rightly so, right? That this is beyond what a human being can pay. A human being cannot pay for another's, make up for someone murdering someone. However, God is far above us. He has far more ability and justification for atoning, making up for our sins. And then additionally, right, we have to ask who is responsible. If I go out and I murder someone, who is responsible for that? Well, obviously I am. Obviously I'm responsible for my own actions. But that doesn't mean that no one else is responsible either. Maybe I was part of a gang and the gang boss was strongly encouraging me to go out and do this. Does he bear some responsibility? Yes, he does. He doesn't bear as much responsibility, perhaps, because I'm the one who ultimately made the choice. But people influencing me, they bear some responsibility. What about my parents? Maybe they were absent. They didn't raise me right. They took a total hands-off approach because they didn't really care about me. Do they bear some responsibility for my inappropriate behavior when I'm an adult, my immoral behavior as an adult? I would say they do. So if we can recognize that parties other than the one committing the sin act bear some responsibility for it, why can't God assume some responsibility for our sin? He chose to create us. He's all-knowing. He's all-powerful. He knew that we would rebel against him. He knew we would commit sins. So why can't he say, I am partially responsible? Yes, you are responsible, but I'm also partially responsible. I chose to create you. Therefore, I will assume more responsibility than I actually bear, and pay the price on your behalf. And then finally, we ask this question, could it be done a different way? And I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't know if this is the only possible way that God could bring atonement. Muslim blasphemy says, how can God die on a cross? Why would God enter into reality and die? That's beneath him. It's pathetic. It's humiliating. And we see here Jesus in the garden praying like a Muslim. Of course, not really, but he is in a prostrate position, right? He's in extreme agony. This is something very difficult, even for God incarnate, to do. And I think that therein lies the reason he did it this way, because it shows his love. Could he just wave his hand and say that sin is forgiven? Maybe. I mean, it might compromise his justice. There might be problems, but maybe he could do it. Maybe he could do it anyway, like Muslims kind of say that God should do. But it wouldn't demonstrate his love, and it wouldn't achieve what he desires, which is a relationship with us. Just magically waving the hand, or being a cosmic vending machine, giving you exactly what you asked for, exactly when you asked for. Yeah, it would make more people believe in God, probably. But it wouldn't bring us into relationship with him, which is what he actually desires. Which then brings the final question here. What about hell? Now, people's objections to hell ultimately usually boil down to, I don't like it. It's really icky, the idea of me going to hell. And I get it, right? It is really icky. It is really horrible. I don't like the idea of hell for me either, right? But then at the same time, the same person will say, but I also kind of do like it. If you propose to someone that Stalin, after being responsible for 10 million plus murders, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but definitely 10 million plus, maybe 50 million, that God just waves his hand and he goes to heaven anyway. You say, that doesn't seem right. I think he should be going to hell. I think that there is a place for it. I just don't want me to be part of that. That's what it really ultimately boils down to. So really, it's I don't like hell. But then there is a question, how can finite amount of sin lead to eternal punishment? Because the classic, so-called classic, not really classic, but the classic doctrine of hell is that it's eternal conscious torment. Well, we have to ask this question, what is good and what is evil? If evil is a real thing, right? If evil is an absolute thing, then it does kind of seem odd that you would be tortured forever for a finite amount of sin. But what if evil isn't a real thing? What if good is evil? What if good is real? What if good is real and evil is just the absence of good? It's not a thing in its own right, but it's the absence of good. So God is good. God in this life, according to Scripture, right, that he sends rain, he sends his blessings on those who are good as well as those who are doing evil. But then at the time of the harvest, he separates the good from the evil. Well, if you're separated from God's presence, you no longer experience good. And yeah, it's quite unpleasant, right? It is torment, but it's not God actively punishing you. It's not God actively making you be in pain, but rather it's the natural consequence of being separated from good. You don't acknowledge that God's good. You don't want to be part of his story. He says, fine, don't be part of my story, which then takes you outside of the good and subjects you to evil, which isn't a thing in its own right. Or alternatively, I said, it's not really the classic doctrine or the classic understanding of hell, of eternal conscious torment. And I say that because from the start of Christianity, there was three proposals: universalism, where everyone goes to heaven eventually, maybe not immediately, but at least eventually; annihilationism, where the good go to heaven and the evil simply cease to exist; or the other doctrine of eternal conscious torment. Now, I don't think there's any good scriptural basis for universalism, nor do I find it morally justifiable. But annihilationism, I think, is justifiable by Scripture. I think that I don't have a firm position on this because I think there's good evidence in Scripture for both annihilationism and eternal torment. And I think that it does make sense that God sustains life. So apart from God, you simply cease to exist. So in the end, perhaps atheists will get what they desire, that they, or at least believe, and that they will cease to exist after the end of bodily life.
But does that gel with the idea that there's a hell where people are tormented? Doesn't that go directly against scripture in that sense?
Well, I think that there's good evidence for both. So, it's eternal, right? You're eternally separated from God when you cease to exist. And it would be compatible with the idea of a finite amount of torture. So, for example, in Revelation, it says that death itself is thrown into the pit. Are we suggesting
Okay.
that, are we suggesting, it says that the flame is eternal. But a flame destroys things, right? So I think you can argue either way. And if
So
death itself
eventually,
is
everything
thrown
that
into
is
the pit,
evil ceases to exist, and then only God's domain remains, basically.
yes, exactly.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
All right, so we come to our conclusion then. So my conclusion is that atheism is the religion of unthinking babies.
And rocks.
Internet
This is my
atheists,
uncle. Meet my
right,
uncle.
and rocks, and monkeys, and caterpillars, and stars, right? Stars are atheists too. Everything's an atheist,
Yep.
except for rational thinking adults. There are not atheists.
And everything's
Internet
deterministic, but
atheists,
we're wrong for having the beliefs that we do.
exactly, right? There's not good and evil don't exist, but you're evil for believing that they do exist, right? That kind of thing. Internet atheists, they're more interested in silly games than in truth. So my advice is that you force them to prove that they are actually interested in information before wasting any time in them. Play their own game. Force them to admit that this typical atheist standard is idiotic and not what any rational person should do. Now, as far as normal atheists, the kind that you won't encounter in YouTube comment sections, but you will encounter if you're talking to people in the real world, people who are kind of just disinterested, don't have strong positions, they offer a number of arguments, but we've shown that none of them are logically sound. And since a personalized version of the problem of evil, an individual will have different precise reasons why they reject God. It might be because their sister died at age 12 of cancer, or it might be because the Armenian genocide or whatever. So you need to understand what the person's exact objection is and respond accordingly. So you need a personal objection to religion demands a personal response, not a generalized response, not a, well, here's the logical argument, you're being irrational type thing, but rather a understanding response. There are many causes of evil in the world, and thus there's probably many explanations for evil. But I think that one that we need to always keep in mind, one that Jesus offers when he encounters a man born blind, and people are asking why he's born blind, he says, so that the glory of God can prevail, so that I can demonstrate my glory to the world. And I think that that's the primary reason why evil exists in the world, is so that we, as representatives of God, as believers, we can represent good to the world. If there was no evil, then people wouldn't appreciate good. And indeed, the world is primarily good, which we can see from the fact that. So
Something I'd like
finally,
to
the
maybe
rational
add is
thing to
that,
do.
sorry, Thaddeus, just that, what was I was gonna make a point on this. Atheists want us to give them clear answers, and yet they will talk about Gödel's uncertainty theorem, and they will claim there's imperfect knowledge. But one day science will figure out, but we're supposed to give them snappy, clear answers right now. We make the same claim that there's imperfect knowledge, some things we take on faith, some things are mysteries. Yet they have exactly the same problem, they just have different terms to describe the same thing, but they demand clarity from us. They've also got uncertainty, they also don't know, but yet they are not consistent. We have one consistent standard, they have multiple personal, subjective standards. That is not consistent, that is not rational.
Exactly. Exactly. Which brings us to the ultimate conclusion, which is the rational thing to do is to go where the evidence leads, to go where the majority, preponderance of evidence leads, not our emotional knee-jerk response. And the reality is, even though atheists go around claiming that they're the rational beings, their behavior shows the exact opposite because they do not want to defend their position. They do not want to give any evidence for it. They just want to give emotional arguments why you shouldn't be a Christian. Because ultimately, in all likelihood, there might be exceptions, but in all likelihood, their own belief is based on their own emotional situation where they had a experience that made them want to reject God, and then they backfilled in so-called rational reasons to do so, but really it was an emotional thing.
You
So the
know,
rational thing
I'd
to do, the
sorry, I'd
non-unthinking
agree with you
baby
there.
thing to do.
So I'd agree with you there. I did some reading
Good.
today, and they said there's some new research being done into why people become atheists. And it was stated in this article I was reading that it's not a rational decision; it's an emotional decision, usually triggered by the fact that as a child growing up, the parents claim to be Christians, but don't act according to Christian rules and guidelines. And the child sees a disconnect, and therefore he steps out away from the religion. Therefore, they need to see consistency from the parent that the word and deed match up. And yet, when they become atheists, then they also lack the consistency.
Yes, I would agree that hypocrites in the church, leaders, but ultimately from your own parents is definitely a major, major cause of people rejecting religion, which logically doesn't make a lot of sense, but just from a human perspective does, because if this person's supposed to be my representative of what Christianity is, and they look like a complete hypocrite, they're not following it. Obviously, it doesn't offer anything of value, right? This is my best example, my own parent, best example I have, and they don't seem to really follow it. So why should I?
Yep.
So the rational thing to do is to go where the evidence leads, not be an unthinking baby, and conclude that Christianity is true. So that is all for me.
Well, that's excellent. Yeah. No, that was really good, and a better ending than than previous. Ah, good grief, Thaddeus! I need to fix you up again. I have no idea what's wrong with my. This is really frustrating. Oh, good grief! What is my Skype? What is
There. Oh, now I'm extra big.
better, but it's still not fixed. Now, how do I fix that? Because I did it earlier, but good grief. Yeah, let's just take us back to where we were and see if it. No, it doesn't fix it. Oh man, why are you?
Yeah, don't
OBS.
worry about it. Thaddeus is outside the box today.
Yeah. So you improved the ending. So what made you yeah, I know we spoke about the ending that it needs a little bit
Yeah,
of
yeah.
a
You
of an
told me to
improvement.
add a conclusion. So the problem was when I did it live, I only had 50 minutes, and so I got to that point, and I'm like, okay, I'm done. But normally, if I wasn't out of time, I would have gave a verbal conclusion and taken questions. So redoing it, having this not time restricted format allowed a more coherent presentation, and also the interaction with you, uh, I think adds value to it to have a more like a conversation than just me lecturing.
True. I mean, I find it easier to have conversations than to just lecture as well. I'm trying to move you up so that I can fix this if I can find where I dropped you. Sometimes OBS can be really difficult and to work with. Let me. Good
Oop,
grief.
almost.
Almost, yeah, I know. You see, but now I've cut off too much from the top. I need to start cutting off from the bottom.
Well,
Now I
you
can,
have this very fancy very fancy format. It looks very nice when it works.
when it works. I know, I don't know why, but it shouldn't be doing this. I mean, unless I need to change, there's one setting that usually needs to be changed, and hopefully I can finally, because it's been a while since we've done this. Okay, I need to shrink you one more time. Yeah, yeah, OBS, OBS. This is so, I'm gonna have to shrink this inwards, shrink this inwards. Good grief. Yeah, so any final words, Thaddeus? I mean, that was really good, and I think it was a really good take on the idea of atheism.
Yeah, my take would, or my final thought, I guess, would be to have conversations with people. Come to understand where someone stands. If they have no interest, right? If they have no interest in Christianity or the truth of the matter, then you move on. You don't cast your pearls before swine. Uh, but on the other hand, if the reason that they have rejected religion is because of a personal tragedy or hypocrisy among their own family, then that offers the possibility of healing. It offers the possibility of restoration, and coming back to faith, back to the truth of the situation. And what a great gift that is that you can give someone, uh, to show them that the hurt you experienced, it does matter. It's not meaningless, but it's not the end of the story. Atheism offers no hope. It offers no possibility of healing and no possibility of justice. You're just left in that pain that you have. But Christianity offers healing, and so I think it's worthwhile having these conversations with
Yeah, I
people.
think atheism is very nihilistic. Don't you think that we've caught up with their argumentation and we're able to meet them and, in fact, clearly stump them these days? Because they used to have these clever sophist answers, and I think we've caught up with them. And I think another avenue that is simply their history, because we're normally put on the back foot. They say, "Prove to me God exists," and now you start stumbling around trying to make proof. Their worldview doesn't even allow for metaphysical answers, so therefore they've rejected your evidence a priori, right? In advance, they've rejected all your evidence. But also, when someone makes a claim, like a Muslim or an atheist says, your system is bad, it's evil, it's wrong, they're implying that their system is better, it is correct, it is superior. Yet, when you go into the history of atheism and the atheists who've done the most heinous, egregious things, you can say, but hold on, your system is evil, it is violent, it is genocidal, it is far, far worse than anything remotely done within my ideology that you're criticizing. And B, I can show that the people who've done these evil things in my ideology were violating the rules, not following the rules. In your system, they're following the rules. So you can turn it back on them and say, hold on, but let's look at your system rather, because you're criticizing mine. Okay, so now prove to me the superiority of yours. Here's your history. And then they turn out to have very, very nasty, dirty feet of clay.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, to both of your points. The first one, that there was a time, right? I freely admit that there was a time where intellectually atheism was on the higher ground. A number of discoveries were made in the 19th century. The church did not know how to respond to these. Atheists seemed to have compelling arguments against the truth of Christianity. But Christianity found the answers, right? We put Christianity to the test. We found that there were good answers to these questions being raised. And nowadays, it's atheism that's on the retreat, intellectually, not like in numbers necessarily, but
Yeah,
intellectually. The top atheists no longer want to make rationalistic arguments. They want to make emotional arguments.
yeah,
They don't want to say Christianity is false. They want to say it's evil because they've lost the argument about truth.
yeah. I mean, atheism plus has devolved into woke. It it turned into a witch hunt and then devolved into woke. Atheists now don't even know what a woman is, and yeah, it's turned into the four horse clowns or whatever. And
Hmm.
yeah, atheism is not very rational, and now every atheist is, I don't know, making up his own definitions. I mean, where is the consistency, because if you're going to have a scientific worldview, it's not only logical and rational, but also consistent. And they're rejecting that by saying that we come up with our own definitions. So
Yeah. The atheist redefining what atheism is a very good example of a very good symptom of the problem, where they basically don't believe in anything except their own thoughts. They redefine everything in their own image, whether it's what a woman is, or whether it's what atheism is. It has become, right, and this is a good example of its intellectual retreat. It's become my feelings, right, and whatever I feel is what's correct. The facts don't matter,
correct,
which
correct.
is ironic, since atheism is supposed to be just the facts.
But the facts are empty. There's no calories there. People want to feel things. I mean, people want emotion, but they've swung too far in the other direction. So yeah, so no,
Yeah,
that was fascinating. I mean, great points. I hope the audience learned something. I hope you've got a good basis for listening to atheists and then asking them these questions or bringing up these points, because it is a very pernicious, destructive, toxic ideology, and the people that they promote. I mean, as you've seen on my show on Darwinism, it is genuinely genocidal. It is toxic. I mean, the poison tree produces poison fruit, and they are constantly appealing to poison trees. So this is something that we need to point out to them. If their ideology is better, let's examine that. And when you go have a close look, you find nothing but dysfunction and evil. So Thaddeus, yeah, last word to you.
yeah. Well, I just say that it's not surprising that when you say that human beings are the product of blind chance, have no particular value, that you end up treating human beings like they have no value, which means if it benefits you personally, you are free to
Yeah,
execute them.
Darwin says we're all animals, and animals are just simply survival of the fittest, killing each other, red in tooth and claw. So yeah, if we're just animals, we just act like animals. I mean, that's not exactly a higher purpose or a higher calling.
Exactly. Christianity, however, offers hope and offers a higher calling, and it fits the evidence. So lots of good reasons to be a Christian. Thank you for having me
Yeah,
on, Lloyd.
no, thank you.
If people are unfamiliar with my channel, they can click on the link. And I love to have discussions with Muslims, but in the rare event that I find an atheist willing to have a reasonable discussion online, I'm happy to have a discussion with them as well.
Yeah, guys. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Thaddeus. I try to keep my shows to like an hour and a quarter, hour and a half max, generally on my channel. But yeah, thank you. This was really, really interesting. So I hope the audience learned something. I hope you gained a lot of value, that you can use this material, use this information. And yeah, I'd love to know more. Please drop a comment below. Thaddeus's name is in the video, the name of the video. That's his link to his channel. So just click that. You'll be able to find his channel. So thank you very, very much, guys. And until next time, God
God
bless.
bless everyone.